They weren't just sleepwalking. Years apart, two brothers were drawn to the same exact spot in the house, in the same eerie way. When the hidden mirror was uncovered, it wasn't just glass staring back. It was something far more unsettling. Hello, my YouTube family. I'm Naira Vox, a 23-year-old college girl with a curious heart and a love for the unknown.
And tonight,
I bring you my 8th horror story on this channel. So for the best experience, put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and let your imagination drift into the darkness. If you enjoy the chills and the thrill, show some love in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more haunted tales every day. My son George. He's always had the oddest circle of friends. I could never figure out why, but ever since he was little, he seemed to gravitate toward the peculiar ones. I have more stories than I can count, but there's one in particular that still clings to my memory, like a splinter you can't quite pull out. This happened when he was in 4th grade. We had just relocated because of my husband's job transfer, and everything was new home, new town, and of course, a new school for George. He's always been this bright, outgoing little boy, so honestly, my husband and I weren't the least bit worried about him adjusting or making friends. As a family, we were settling in better than expected. George seemed happy and school was going smoothly, or so we thought. The first time I met the other parents from his class, I was relieved. Everyone seemed normal, polite, respectful, the kind of people you'd trust your child to hang out with. But just a few months after our move, I got a call, middle of the day. It was the school. They wanted one of us, his parents, to come in and discuss an incident involving George and another child. My husband was at work, so I headed over alone. I remember the emotions swirling inside me, confusion and, honestly, a bit of frustration. Was George in trouble? Had he gotten into a fight? If he had started it, well, of course, there'd be consequences. But the thing is, fighting? That wasn't like him. Not at all. George has always been gentle, even-tempered. The kind of kid who'd talk through his feelings instead of acting out. So the thought of him being in any kind of altercation, it just didn't sit right. What really threw me off, though, was his silence. As I walked him down the hallway toward the principal's office, I kept asking him what had happened, but he wouldn't say a word. Not one. And George? He's usually the kind of kid who can't stop talking. An open book, always eager to share every tiny detail of his day. But this time, nothing. That silence. It chilled me more than I expected. I assumed he was just either too ashamed or maybe even afraid. So, at the time, I didn't push it. When we arrived, the principal asked George to wait outside his office. So I left him there, sitting quietly while I stepped inside. He gestured to the seat across from his desk, and I sat down. Then came the usual questions. How is George at home? Does he behave? Does he argue? Is he respectful? I answered honestly. He was a dream to raise. Truly well-mannered, thoughtful, kind. And I'm not just saying that because I'm his mother. It was the truth. Then came the reason for the meeting. Apparently, something had happened after recess. George and another boy, Sebastian, had gotten into a brief physical encounter. Sebastian. I recognized the name instantly. George had mentioned him plenty of times, always warmly. They were close, maybe even best friends. Naturally, I asked what had happened. According to what the school had pieced together, George and Sebastian had been the last two students lingering outside. They were walking up the steps when, suddenly, George reached into his pocket, pulled out an eraser, and hit Sebastian in the head with it. Sebastian fell, screaming. caught completely off guard. I was stunned. That just wasn't my son. He'd never hurt someone for no reason, especially not someone he cared about. I asked the principal more questions, hoping for some kind of clarity, but there wasn't much to give. No teachers had witnessed it, but both boys gave eerily similar accounts of the event. No contradictions. No confusion. The principal assured me that George wasn't in trouble. He said these kinds of minor incidents happen sometimes. Kids lose their tempers or act out impulsively. He just wanted to make sure I was informed. No punishment, no follow-up. That did put me at ease somewhat. I thanked him and left. George didn't say a word the entire ride home. He just sat there, staring out the window. But that night, just before bed, he finally spoke. I'll admit it, I was getting irritated. His silence, it was starting to push my patience. Maybe that's why he finally opened up. He looked at me, nervously, and said, "Sebastian tricked me." I asked him what he meant, and that's when the story shifted. Apparently, the two of them had been pretending to play Street Fighter during recess. It was Sebastian's idea. At some point, George was told to do a KO move, and so, going along with it, he pulled out an eraser, just like Sebastian instructed. But then, Sebastian threw himself to the ground, screaming like he was actually hurt. Before George could say a word, Sebastian leaned in and whispered, "If you don't act like you really hit me, I'll hurt you for real." So George played along. And just like that, the teachers assumed it was a real fight. My heart dropped. He had been manipulated and made to look like the villain. No wonder he hadn't wanted to talk about it. I was furious, but not at George. He was the victim. Instead of calling the school, I decided to handle it myself. That night, I dug out the school directory and found Sebastian's mother's number. When she answered, she introduced herself as Maggie. To my surprise, her voice was warm and soft, very kind. Honestly, I wasn't expecting that. She told me she was already aware of the incident and had gotten the full story from Sebastian. She'd even disciplined him. I found it odd that Sebastian had confessed that quickly, but I was relieved I didn't have to fight to be believed. Then Maggie said something that made me pause. She explained that Sebastian had always struggled with mild behavioral issues, that sometimes he acted like he wasn't himself, like he'd slip into the mindset of another person entirely. The more she talked, the less angry I felt. She wasn't making excuses, just being honest. And honestly, I started to feel bad for the kid. Then she suggested something unexpected, a sleepover, so the boys could rebuild their friendship and leave the incident behind them. She offered to host, and I appreciated the gesture. It felt like a fresh start. That weekend, George and I drove over to Maggie's house. He was back to his usual, energetic self, chatting away in the car, smiling again. Maggie welcomed us in, and we ended up sharing a glass of wine while the boys headed down to the basement to play. And just like before, she came across as completely sincere, friendly, honest. I actually enjoyed talking with her. But if I had known what was really going on down in that basement, I would have never let him stay. I ended up staying longer than I'd planned. The hours just slipped by. We were chatting, sipping wine. It all felt oddly normal. But eventually I had to ask. Something about Sebastian had been quietly nagging at me. So, gently, I brought it up. Had he always behaved a little differently? That's when Maggie's tone shifted. She lowered her voice, almost like she didn't want the walls to hear. She admitted that Sebastian had always struggled socially, making friends, fitting in. They'd taken him to see a few specialists over the years. Nothing serious, just something he might grow out of. She explained that he was doing better lately, more in control, that the increase in social interaction, especially at school, was actually a positive sign. I didn't dig deeper. Truthfully, I just wanted to hear that George would be safe. Maggie promised me he was in good hands. She insisted Sebastian had never been violent, just odd sometimes. That was enough for me. Honestly, I respected her openness. And in a strange way, I felt a sense of comfort knowing that George might actually help this boy open up, maybe even learn how to be a real friend. Eventually, it was time for me to head home. I went downstairs to say goodbye and check on the boys. They were sitting cross-legged on the carpet, laughing over a game of Battleship. George looked perfectly happy. I bent down, gave him a quick kiss on the forehead, and told him to behave. He smiled and gave me a thumbs up. I left feeling relieved. The next morning, I drove back to pick him up. When I pulled up to the house, George was already standing by the door with his backpack on, smiling. He looked bright-eyed, energized. I assumed everything had gone great, but I was wrong. I greeted Maggie that morning, cheerful as ever. George and I said our goodbyes, and I packed up his things into the car. But barely 2 blocks into the drive, George started crying. Not sniffling, sobbing. I immediately asked him what was wrong, my heart racing, trying not to panic. And what he said next, Vicky, it chilled me to my core. He told me everything had been perfectly fine until bedtime. The boys had set up their sleeping bags on the basement floor, 2 air mattresses side by side, nothing unusual. They'd laughed, played games, and drifted off. But sometime during the night, George woke up. He didn't know why at first, until he heard whispering. It was faint, and it was coming from the basement bathroom. The door was cracked open, and inside something flickered. Not a normal light. George swore it looked like candlelight. Dancing shadows, low and pulsing. He leaned in, listening. It was Sebastian. But he wasn't just talking. He was having a conversation. At first, George thought maybe he was on the phone, until he realized there was no one else. Sebastian was speaking to the mirror. And he wasn't calling himself Sebastian. He was calling himself Mr. Jim. George lay there, frozen in place. Sebastian wasn't whispering to anyone but his own reflection. And then the candle went out. The bathroom fell into darkness. Total silence. George squeezed his eyes shut, pretending to be asleep. But then, the bathroom door creaked. Footsteps soft and slow. And then, whispers, right above him. He couldn't make out the words. It didn't even sound like English. The voice was low, guttural, not Sebastian's. George just lay there, still and silent, too terrified to move. Eventually, the whispering stopped. Sebastian crawled back into bed. And when the morning came, he was smiling like nothing had happened. George didn't dare ask him about it. He just wanted to leave. And now, hearing this, I was horrified. My mother's instinct screamed that this wasn't just childhood imagination. Something was off. Very off. I didn't know what it was. But I knew I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't keep it in any longer. I needed to tell someone. So I called Maggie. At first, she laughed, said Sebastian was just a creative kid. But the more I pressed, the more her voice began to crack. And then, she told me the truth. Those behavioral problems she brushed off, they were far worse than she'd let on. One psychiatrist suspected dissociative identity disorder. They'd already moved twice before, because Sebastian had been kicked out of school. She whispered that part, like it was some dark family secret, and I sat there, absolutely stunned, furious. Why hadn't she told me this sooner? Why would she let my son sleep in that house with someone she knew wasn't stable? But before I could say anything more, she did something I didn't expect. She begged me not to tell the school. Her voice was shaking, and not in fear of what the school might do, but what it might do to him. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt sorry for her, but another part, the mother in me, knew something was horribly wrong. So I blurted out, "Okay," and hung up before I could change my mind. I told myself I'd make a decision by the end of the week, but I never got the chance, because that Monday, Sebastian attacked another student. This time it was serious. Serious enough that the school issued a statement to all parents. The details were vague, but the message was clear. Sebastian Fallon was expelled. I tried calling Maggie, but her number had been disconnected.
Just like that. Gone.
We had spoken days ago. Now, she was unreachable. No email. No backup number. Just silence. And I wasn't even sure what I wanted to say to her. Only that I needed to say something. The days passed, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. The whispers, the flickering light, Mr. Jim. Curiosity ate at me, until finally I gave in. I drove to their house, and when I got there, it was empty. No moving trucks, no signs of a rushed departure, nothing. It was like they had simply vanished, and none of it made sense. How could they have left so quickly? I tried everything to find them. Googled their names, scrolled through forums, checked school directories. Nothing. No forwarding address. No social media. No online footprint whatsoever. It was like they had never existed. Just
gone.
That was a long time ago. And George? He turned out okay. Honestly, I think he's forgotten most of it. But I haven't. Not even close. I still wonder what could have happened in that basement if things had gone even slightly differently. If George hadn't woken up. If he had. And I think about Sebastian too. Where he is. What he's become. What he's done since. Now, here's something you should know. I didn't grow up in a household that believed in ghosts. I grew up Southern Baptist. We didn't believe in spirits or wandering souls, but we absolutely believed in demons. Let me explain. If something unexplainable happened, it wasn't a haunting. It was biblical, something darker. And rejecting the idea of demons? Well, that meant rejecting scripture itself. I never fully accepted all of it, but that kind of fear gets embedded deep, especially when you're a child. Still, not everyone in my family was like that. My mother? She was different. Faith was optional to her. Not atheist. Not agnostic. Just indifferent. She'd shrug and say, "God, and I have an understanding." Whenever I asked why she didn't go to church, while I clung to religion for structure and safety, she drifted further from it. It was just one of the many things that built a wall between us. And I won't sugarcoat it. My mom, she struggled. Addiction, mental illness, the kind she refused to acknowledge, let alone treat. Some days she was fine. Others, she was completely unrecognizable. Looking back, I'm almost certain she had schizophrenia or something like it. But before you judge, it was a different time. Mental health just wasn't something people talked about. Then one afternoon, I had a nightmare. Not just any nightmare. the kind that brands itself into your brain. And to this day, I remember every single detail. I was lying in bed when it happened again. My mother stormed into my room, screaming in a fit of rage. She grabbed me by the wrist, shaking me violently. I woke up, drenched in sweat. My body was frozen, still gripped by the fear. But before I could shake off the nightmare, it happened. For real. The door slammed open, and there she was, exactly like in my dream. Same twisted expression, same unhinged anger, same words. It was like the dream had somehow predicted it. I barely managed to push her off, screaming for her to stop. Then, just as suddenly as it began, she left. I was left shaking, trying to make sense of it. When I confronted her the next morning, she had no memory of it. She was confused, even hurt, that I was so shaken by it. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Some bizarre overlap between my subconscious and her moods. But a part of me knew better, wondered if something darker was at play. Weeks later, I heard it, her scream. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't distressed. It was excited. I don't even know how to explain it, but that's the only word I can think of. I rushed outside and froze. There she was, standing in the yard, grinning, holding a massive 7-foot-long snake, barehanded. Terrifying enough, right? But here's the thing. My mother had a lifelong phobia of snakes. She couldn't even look at one on TV without recoiling. And yet there she stood, gripping one like it was a toy. She smiled wider and motioned for me to come closer, to touch it. I froze. I took a step back, shaking my head. I literally said, "Mom, what the hell?" But the look in her eyes told me. She didn't even hear me. She just smiled wider, tilted her head, like she was trying to scare me. I couldn't handle it. I turned and ran, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding. I peeked out the window and saw her still standing there, holding the snake like an offering. Eventually, she let it slither onto the ground, then walked back inside, like nothing had happened. Later, when I asked her about it, she just shrugged, told me I must have had a strange dream, refused to entertain me any further when I pressed. But that was nothing compared to what happened next. That winter, my church held an overnight lock-in. I was relieved to go. Church was my escape, a place where I could be around normal, predictable people. My mother dropped me off, completely sober, and even kissed my forehead before driving away. At around 4:30 a.m., just as we were settling into sleep, a loud knocking echoed through the chapel. We all sat up, glancing at each other, unsure of what was happening. The knocking moved, traveling around the building in an impossible way. At times, it sounded like it was coming from multiple directions at once. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It was rhythmic, circling the chapel, like someone or something was trying to break in. The pastor, the only one with a key, was asleep in his office and hadn't heard a thing. I ran to wake him, and as soon as he stepped into the chapel, the knocking stopped. He opened the front doors and literally stumbled back in fear. Standing there, barefoot and sweating in the freezing air, was my mother. Her clothes were disheveled, her hair dripping with sweat. Her lips were moving, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. She didn't acknowledge the pastor. Her eyes locked on me immediately. A slow, unsettling smile stretched across her face. As she walked toward me, I wanted to run. The pastor tried to hold me back, whispering, "Stay here." But I felt completely powerless, like I had no choice but to go with her. I climbed into the car, afraid she was going to do something, but she didn't. The drive home was silent.
She didn't speak. She didn't explain.
She didn't answer when I asked why she was there. When we got home, she stopped in the doorway and just stared at me. She stood there silently, watching me as I walked to my room. I closed the door, locked it, and lay awake for hours, listening. In the morning, she was in the kitchen, cooking breakfast. She was cheerful and clearly oblivious to what had happened the night before. She jumped back when she saw me, saying she was just about to pick me up from the church. I felt the blood drain from my face. She had no memory of knocking on the church doors, no memory of driving me home. It was freaky. I expected someone, the pastor, a church elder, even one of the chaplains, to say something about what had happened. But no one did. It was like they didn't know what to make of it. Or worse, they didn't want to. That's kind of the way people treated my mom back then. That was decades ago. She's gone now, but her memory is something that will never leave me, for better or for worse. I don't know if I believe in demons or the supernatural anymore, but I can't explain what happened. The logical explanation is that she was suffering from mental illness, maybe addiction withdrawal, or maybe something else entirely. But the memory lapses, the eerie timing, the way she acted like a different person some nights, it still haunts me. I tell myself there's a rational answer for all of it, but even now I'm not sure I believe that. My eldest son started sleepwalking when he was about 8 or 9. I had heard of kids going through phases like that, so I wasn't too concerned at first. It was just one of those things. A little unsettling, sure, but nothing I thought much about. I'm a pretty light sleeper, so none of my kids have ever been able to sneak around the house at night without me knowing. That's actually how I first figured out about my son's habit. Most nights, I'd wake up and find him standing in the hallway outside my bedroom, walking slightly on his heels, shifting his weight from foot to foot. His eyes would be open, but they weren't seeing anything. That was the one part that always got me. For any of you who have lived with a sleepwalker, you know exactly what I'm talking about. His gaze would pass right through me, empty and distant, like he was looking past me into something that wasn't there. I couldn't see. It was always extremely strange, and I never fully acclimated to finding him like that. Sometimes he'd mumble something under his breath, words too soft and slurred to understand. Other times he wouldn't make a sound, just standing there, breathing in that slow, steady way. That somehow made it even worse. I gently guided him to bed, whispering his name, telling him everything was fine. He never seemed to remember any of it in the morning. Things escalated a few months after I made the realization that he was a sleepwalker. One night, I woke up to a rhythmic tapping sound. It sounded like water droplets repeatedly dripping onto a window pane. Only it wasn't raining outside. It was soft, barely loud enough to wake me at first. I thought it was part of a dream, some far-off noise that my half-asleep brain had misinterpreted. But as I lay there, the sound continued, steady and deliberate. It wasn't sporadic like rainfall would be. It occurred at regular intervals, and always at the same volume. I kept listening, trying to figure out what it could be. It wasn't the house settling, and it wasn't the wind outside. It was too precise. Once I realized the tapping wasn't going to stop, I begrudgingly accepted that I'd have to deal with it. I sat up and looked towards the door, which is where the sound was coming from. My husband was fast asleep, and I didn't want to disturb him. I should mention that I wasn't scared, just curious. Otherwise, I probably would have woken him up. Anyway, I got out of bed to investigate. When I stepped into the hallway, I saw him, my son, facing the wall, his forehead lightly knocking against it in slow, measured taps. His fingertips gently grazed the wall in rhythm with his forehead taps, as if he was trying to walk through it. I remember calling his name, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't react, just kept pressing his head forward, knocking it in that eerie, rhythmic way, like he was testing something, like he was trying to push through. I stepped closer, but right before I was about to intervene, I hesitated. Something about the way he was moving genuinely sent a chill right through me. I gently reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder, shaking him just enough to pull him out of whatever trance he was in. He blinked, took a step back, and then, as if nothing had happened, let me lead him back to bed. He never mentioned it in the morning. It happened a few more times, but it was pretty infrequent. If I'm being honest, I figured it was just another strange habit of sleepwalkers. Maybe some kind of subconscious response to the wall being there. Some internal sense of space that his dreaming mind hadn't accounted for. And eventually he outgrew it. The sleepwalking stopped, and the strange vacant staring in the hallway became a weird little memory that I mostly forgot about. That is, until my younger son started doing the same thing years later. The sleepwalking, at first I brushed it off. Kids go through phases. Some behaviors repeat themselves. It was just so uncanny that both of them started sleepwalking around the same age. Again, though, nothing too unusual. Genetics are a fascinating thing. But eventually I started noticing the little details, the things that gave me a growing sense of concern. It wasn't just that he sleepwalked. It was how he sleepwalked. He stood in the hallway, shifting from foot to foot, his eyes open but unfocused. He moved the same way as my older son had, with that slow, eerie rhythm, like his movements weren't completely random. It was unsettling. It felt like I was living the memory of watching my older son do the same thing years earlier. But it got worse than that. One night, I woke up to that tapping noise again. I already knew what I'd see before I stepped into the hallway. And I was right. There he was, forehead pressed to the exact same spot, knocking against the wall like he was trying to step into something that wasn't there. It was the exact same behavior my older son had exhibited all those years ago. From the forehead taps, all the way down to the way his fingers brushed against the wall. I called his name. Nothing. I touched his shoulder. Nothing. He just kept knocking, his small body swaying slightly, lost in some deep, unreachable place. And that's when it hit me. He had never seen his older brother sleepwalk, at least not that I know of. His brother hadn't done this in years. There was no reason for him to exhibit the same exact behavior. Not just the wandering, but the standing, the tapping, the eerie, misplaced urgency of it. I don't know why, but that thought made me feel sick. After some badgering, I eventually snapped him out of his trance. I guided him back to bed and tucked him in, like I had done so many times before. I tried to tell myself that it was just one of those things. And then, just like his brother, he outgrew it. Just like that. No more sleepwalking, no more tapping. He had no recollection of it either. For years, I didn't think about it. In all honesty, I had forgotten about the whole thing. But there's a reason I'm writing this now. My sons are away at college now, and the house is a lot quieter than I'm used to. Because of that, my husband and I have to find new things to occupy some of that downtime. A few weeks ago, we decided to renovate the house. The house is pretty old, and we've lived in it long enough that we decided to change things up. New floors, new paint, some fresh updates to make the place feel new again. It was all minor work, nothing too intensive. We were stripping the old wallpaper when we noticed something underneath. I thought it was just some old backing or maybe a weird stain, but as we peeled more away, my breath caught. It was an old antique-style mirror, a mirror that had been covered for some reason. My first thought was, why the hell would someone cover a mirror instead of removing it? I felt ridiculous standing there staring at a piece of glass like it was going to do something, but I couldn't help but feel like we weren't supposed to find it, like it had been sealed away for a reason. And that's when I realized the mirror was positioned in the exact spot on the wall that my sons had been bumping into all those years ago. The memories came flooding back, and I stood there in shock. There was no logical reason they should have known it was there. They couldn't have, and yet somehow they had. Both of them had independently been trying to walk into something that was impossible to see through the wallpaper. Forget about the fact that they were unconscious. I immediately got rid of that mirror, but I'm still pretty freaked out by the whole thing. There's got to be some kind of rational explanation for this, but I can't think of one. I still don't know what to make of this. I really don't.